Good evening, everyone. This is the Cosmic Consciousness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Sage. And this evening we have a very nice treat to have a conversation with a friend. And we were just discussing, it's probably been over 10 years ago that you and I crossed paths, and it was probably through First Universalist. This is Dana Miller. And I became very interested in some of your experiences with Council for Spiritual Practices, your experiences of peak experiences, elevated mystic experience, whatever you want to call it, with your with the use of mushrooms. And I think that was even before it was actually legal in Colorado.
Oh, yeah. That was before that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we have since actually intersected again through some mutual friends via activism with numerous kinds of charitable organizations and immigration issues and one thing or another. And in fact, Dana is very active currently in assisting immigrant families. And I don't know if you're working with the same kind of Quaker communities that Donna and Orv are, but you can talk about that in a little bit. So, Dana, do you want to provide a little background or a few sentences, paragraph introduction of yourself?
Well, hello, everyone. It's good to be here with you, Daniel. Thank you for thinking of me. And I trust that we will have an interesting conversation wherever it goes. I'm kind of a dilettante. I've done a bunch of different things, and I get really interested in certain things for like chunks of time. Like I was a flight attendant for almost 30 years, but after that, I got really interested in the arts and was involved in the arts for like 4-year chunk. And then I was really interested in theater, and I was involved in theater for 4 years. And then I was really interested in sustainability. And so I was 4 years of that. Then we had the he who will not be named first Trump said it administration, and so I was involved a lot in activism then, and then been involved over the years with I started an organization called Grow Local Colorado, and so I've been involved in healthy food access and gardening and growing for donation, and now I'm heavily a group of people. We have 22 teams across the state of Colorado, and we have immigrant protection teams. So we are involved in all sorts of things around protecting and showing up for our neighbors. So a lot of different stuff. I've been interested in a lot of different things over the years.
And that's a good reason to have you as a guest on the podcast for all those varied interests. As a matter of fact, I have to say that is connected to a cosmic consciousness, a perception of the whole. Okay, I think we're back after a couple of technical difficulties. So, Dana, I think you were talking about how you were a dilettante and all of the different things that you were doing. And the latest thing you were discussing, I believe, was the immigration coalition that you've created. So if you want to talk a little more about that, and then we're going to do a little retrospective of when you and I first met.
Well, so what I'm involved in now is a group of people who we've started these teams all across Colorado, and we're called immigrant protection teams. And we do all sorts of things to help the situation of our neighbors, especially in this difficult time where we're living in now.
Yeah. So you were talking about being a dilettante and dabbling in a little of this and a little of that. The thing that I was most fascinated about with our connection a number of years ago, 10 years ago or more, was your effort to work with the Council for Spiritual Practices and your experience. I think it was psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and having a couple of experiences with them of an elevated nature. So let's kind of rewind the tape back to that, and then we can maybe trace some of this back to the future. So if you recall, the conversations we were having, one of the things I asked you about, why were you doing that? Why were you interested maybe in that episode of your dilettante
Yeah. Yeah.
explorations?
Hmm. Well, I was around, I think I was 60. I turned 60. And I was, that was when a lot of the ayahuasca stuff was going on, and a whole lot of people were going to Peru, and a whole lot of people were doing ayahuasca stuff. And I found that all really interesting. I found all of the psychedelic literature and everything that was going on really, really interesting. I had done LSD when I was younger, much younger, but hadn't really done anything over the years. But I decided, number one, because I found a book by a guy named James Fadiman, who was involved with all of the research around psychedelics in the 60s. He was one of those guys, and he wrote a book called something like How to Have a Safe Therapeutic and Mystical Journey or something. So it was based on the research that John Hopkins was doing with when they were finding that psilocybin was helping people that had end of life people with cancer that had end of life fears, and all sorts of other things. They were doing all sorts of research, but they had this really cool protocol that was very precise. And I'm a good girl, and I always do the right things. So I decided that I was going to take the protocol in James Fadiman's book and do it right to the T. So it was things like you would spend a few days ahead of a journey and really kind of decide what kinds of things you'd like to look at, and just kind of prepare. Also, the day of, you're with a guide or somebody who sits with you. You lay down with something over your eyes so that you're not engaging with the outside world. It's more of an internal thing. They even give you a playlist of the kind of music to listen to. A lot of it's classical. They also, in the book, it told you the different dosages for if you wanted this kind of journey versus this kind of journey versus this kind of journey. So I kind of did a low dose, but enough that I was supposedly guaranteed to have a mystical journey. So I did it according to that protocol, and did it twice as a gift to myself turning 60. And yeah, it was quite the gift.
So, can you talk about what you remember
Mhm.
from both or the first ones?
Yeah. I'll do kind of a Cliff's Note version, because if you've ever talked to anybody that's had a psychedelic trip, they're pretty complicated and they're pretty hard to describe, and it can take a while. So I'm just going to tell you as I'm looking back, looking at the two journeys I did. The theme of the first journey I would call heaven. The theme of the second journey I would call earth. The first journey, I ended up in a very mystical place. It was actually I would call it was a celestial heaven, which I don't even really believe in any of that. But I ended up in a place where there was kind of the voices of the angels praising the divine. It was quite emotional, quite beautiful. And in fact, well, and then so that's all I'll say about that. It was amazing, and it was extremely beautiful. The second one was more difficult, in that I had decided to use different music. The first one I used like classical music. The second one I decided I was going to use a music from a whole different culture, a culture that I wasn't familiar with. So I used, I think it was some Middle Eastern music, which turned out to be. It took me to. It was difficult. At one point, I had to turn off the music because it was just so incredibly intense, and perhaps just culturally, I wasn't in tune with that music. Maybe the classical music, there was some cultural things. I don't know if I could talk about this forever. Okay, so the second one, it was more of I was in a space where it was a difficult place to be. But there were some really interesting things that were happening there. I felt like I was in a world where I was asking to be able to operate, but I didn't have I wasn't the right kind of animal or the right kind of being to be in that space. So it was difficult, but it had this wonderful birthing at the end, where I ended up in some heavy grieving for the death of my mother. So it's kind of like the heaven of the first journey, the mater, the mother of the second journey. So it was kind of like, in a way, you could kind of look at father and mother for the two. But one of the things I love, this is a really fun story. I just want to tell you really quickly. The second journey I decided to do on the day, what was the name of that? The Good Friday experiment. Are you familiar with the Good Friday experiment?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. So years and years ago, they did this research. I think was it at Harvard or some?
It was it was actually at Johns Hopkins, and it was with Walter Pahnke, who was the doctoral advisor for Timothy Leary.
And they took a bunch of divinity students and put them in the basement of a church. They gave them, half of them psilocybin, half of them not, and then they were able to hear the service from above. And then they interviewed these people, and supposedly the people who took psilocybin had incredible experiences that they took with them for the rest of their lives. They said it was one of the most meaningful things they'd ever done. So I decided to do my second journey on Good Friday, in honor of the Good Friday experiment. But 2 or 3 days after the journey, I was having lunch with some friends and I was kind of telling them a little bit about this, and they were looking at me like I was stark raving mad, of course. But then when I went out and got in the car, I turned on the radio, and the first thing I heard out of the radio was Good Friday experiment, because Radio Lab or something was doing a piece on bliss, and they were talking about the Good Friday experiment. So that was pretty awesome. So, and then what was really fun too is after I did that and I got really interested in all of it, I went to one of the MAPS conferences, the multidisciplinary, the people who've done all this stuff over the years.
For psychedelic studies. Yeah.
Yes. And I went to Oakland for one of their conferences. And there were maybe 400 people there. There were there was an ayahuasca track. So Gabor Mate was there, and there were a bunch of people who had been involved in researching in the 60s. Some of them who have since passed were there. It was absolutely fascinating. There were 400 people there. And as a lot of the people that might be listening right now, Dan, knows that they did the same conference. They do it every 2 years. The same conference last year in Denver, got over 20,000 people. So that's a little bit about those two gifts, the journeys that I took.
Yeah, I think it was not last year, but maybe the year before, that MAPS, the multidisciplinary study for psychedelic studies, or whatever. Yes. Mm-hmm. Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. That's MAPS. They had their conference right here in Denver.
Yeah, that's what I just said. Yeah, they had 20,000 people.
And the Good Friday experiment, you're talking about, half of them had the niacin just as sort of a placebo, and the other had the real psilocybin. 3 of the more famous subjects from that psilocybin part, Houston Smith, the great scholar of world religions, and the Berrigan brothers, 2 Jesuit priests, famous, of course, for protests during the Vietnam War. So, yeah, it transformed their lives. Almost every single one of them did follow-up studies, and how it was so transformative. It just penetrated the rest of their lives. But, well, you have also talked about, to me, talked about having, besides, experimenting with LSD in your younger life,
Yeah.
had some that were endogenous, something that just kind of came up spontaneously without any artificial aids. You want to talk about any of those experiences?
Yeah, and it was a long time ago, so I hopefully will remember pretty well what happened. But it was when I was in my 40s, and I think during my 40s, and maybe this is common for people, I was going through a really intense spiritual, thing. Reading Jung and Teresa of Avila as well. Uh, and I was doing a lot of artwork, so there was a lot of imagery that was coming up for me, and a lot of journaling, and I was just busy spiritually. And at one point, I went through it's about a 6 month period of like serious bliss. Um, just this visceral feeling of the nectar of love, like just, I don't know, like coursing through my body. I mean, it was a really, really, it was an amazing time. It was very, very happy, very peaceful. Uh, it was a wonderful time. But one day I crashed and I went into a deep depression. And so I didn't know. I kind of felt like, oh my God, how have the house forsaken me? I couldn't understand how I would go through this bliss and then I would just crash. So I actually at the time lived across the street from the National Cathedral in Washington, which is our, national cathedral. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go and ask somebody there, the priest or the pastor, or whatever, like if they could just sit down and talk to me about what might have happened to me. And I was actually terribly disappointed that the main guy, the pastor, whoever I spoke with, kind of dismissed me and didn't have any real information that was helpful. Um, but then I started reading to find if I could find some authors that maybe could encapsulate what I would have gone through. And I'm not a Christian, but the only ones that really spoke to me were Teresa of Avila in terms of the interior castle, and especially St. John of the Cross and the Dark Night of the Soul. When I read some of the descriptions, it felt like it had exactly uh, spoken to the experience that I'd been through. So then I was to learn whatever that dark night of the soul or the depression was to teach me was something much different than what I was taught during the really blissful times.
Do you remember the companion or overwhelming sense of mindset that you had during that period of bliss? What was going on? Did it feel like you were in the real world but in a blissful state, or did you feel like you're in a blissful state in a fake world, or what?
Wow.
Any way you can describe what that was like?
I'll just tell you one thing that is coming up for me right now is that I remember laying on my bed. It was a rainy day, laying on my bed, and I felt as it was very visceral. It was very body oriented, and I felt like it was love was loving love was loving love, and it was just there. It was like a nectar. It was like a physical sweet nectar of this love that was moving through me. I don't know what else to
Do
say.
you remember how it came on, where you were when it first
No, that's
started?
a really good question, and I don't remember that.
Yeah. If you were in the middle of working, you're on a flight,
No, I
or
don't.
if
I don't
you.
think I think it came on. It wasn't as abrupt as when it left. Let's put it that way. I don't remember like all of a sudden one day going, realizing that I was in this state of bliss. But it was obvious after a few months that, yeah.
So, was this 6 months of bliss prior to or after you'd maybe done a little experimentation with LSD?
Oh no, way before. Oh
Okay.
no, it was I did LSD when I was in my early 20s, and then this was in my 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was your, was it just recreational for LSD, or was there something you were searching for there, or?
Yeah, it was recreational. With a boyfriend. It was recreational for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So did something come out of that, or did it just feel like, wow, this is just way cool, and it's the, electric acid Kool-Aid,
Yeah.
you know?
What I remember from the best LSD experience was sitting on a cliff in uh, south of San Diego. On one of the cliff, there was no one there, and it was this beautiful place, and there were whales going by, and it was just I was just sat very quietly and just watched this incredible, beautiful world happen, and I felt that my breath and the cosmic breath of the world of the universe was the same breath, and that was a very visceral. I was like, yeah, it was obvious. It was obvious that the breath was.
Did you grow up in a like in a religious denomination or anything like that, or so? What
No,
piqued your interest, either simultaneously with or before this blissful period you had when you were in that, kind of spiritual searching state? What do you think brought that on?
I don't know. I
Just
don't know.
became, yeah,
Just you know, it just happened. I don't know. I can't say this led to this led to this. I don't know. I didn't
yeah,
grow. I grew up in a family that, bless my parents. They were so sweet. They decided at a certain point that it probably would be a good idea to take the kids to a church because you're supposed to let take the kids to a church. And so we all went to this Methodist church together for a while. And after a few months, we as a family we all kind of looked at each other and went, nah. So I didn't grow up with.
yeah.
You know, they were
Uh,
very humanistic, but they were not
yeah.
Christians.
Are you originally from Colorado?
Mhm.
Yeah. So where'd you go to high school?
I'm a wheat ridge farmer, and I was
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember you'd gone to school with Dave Logan.
yes, he was a year behind me.
I forgot that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Sure. So, what Methodist church was it? Do you remember?
Oh, no,
Or
I don't
how old you were at the time?
yeah, I was probably in junior high or something. I don't know, but it was obvious we weren't interested.
Yeah. Well, so as we wind through all those years where you're having kind of this endogenous blissful state for 6 months, and then, fast forward to, looking for it, it seems to me that there was a specific reason you wanted to engage the Council for Spiritual Development and a journey with psilocybin or magic mushrooms. And it had to do with migraines or something like that. Was that only just sort of an attending issue, or
God,
was,
you have got a memory. I don't remember migraines being. I have had migraines most of my life, but I don't remember that being part of deciding
okay?
to do psilocybin. But you obviously have a better memory of our conversation than I do. So
Yeah.
it could have been part of it.
Have you still have migraines?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's all under control.
Were they better or afterwards, or
I
worse,
don't.
or same, or
I
about the
can't
same?
tell any
Yeah.
different.
So, are you in contact with any other people from the council, from spiritual
Oh, I
practices?
never knew any of them. I never. I just read the information, whatever that guy that kind of ran it. I read all of that because I was interested in everything that had to do
Yeah,
with the whole psychedelic
yeah,
world, and especially people that were doing it therapeutically. I thought it was fascinating.
yeah. So you kind of wound out of that into, and this is kind of the way in which I've always sort of known you as an activist and engaged in, social, political, cultural causes. Um, do you feel like there's a spiritual dimension to that, or is it just, okay, we need to make it a better world? What is it that motivates you to be engaged in these kind of causes? But let me back up. I'll
Mhm.
ask that question in a minute. When's the first time you remember being interested in in social activism and being engaged like that?
Oh, I think I've always had a very strong sense of being of wanting to be a volunteer, wanting to volunteer with things. And never wanting to get paid or be part of a nonprofit or anything. I always wanted it to be something that I wasn't paid for, because I felt like then I could do what I wanted. I wouldn't have to be responsible for anyone, but that I would have the freedom to volunteer where I wanted to, because of my dilettante nature.
So, in the first stages of your dilettante nature,
Yeah.
what were the first social active kind of engagements you remember being really plugged into?
Well, can I veer off just a bit?
Yes.
Because the thing I'm prompted to say right now is that if people will ask you, like after a journey or something, like, how has it changed you? How has it changed your life? Um, what's been really interesting and fascinating is that after going through the most amazing things that I went through the journey, I realized that human beings, we are capable of experiencing anything. And so I now, people can talk about alien abductions, or people can talk about ghosts, or people can talk about all this wacky things. And a lot of people just go, oh, you're crazy. Or, you know, I'm like, I think that happened to you. And that's fascinating. And so I have no like judgment that I, I'm just really open to the fact that people experience. And, um, and that's allowed me to, I think, just be a more open person uh, to others' experiences, and to not think that my way of looking at things is the right way, because yeah. So we can go another.
That's really great. I'm glad you were
I can.
prompted to say that, because that's a question I should have asked you anyway. Oh no, and I know that you just bumped off, and it did one of those buffering things on your end. I'm going to stop. Okay, another little technical snafu, but there was only momentary. So, what I was saying was that it really is great that you were prompted to say that, because that's a question I should have asked anyway. Um, and again, we've referenced Saint Teresa of Avila a couple of times, and what I was struck about her interior castle was, meditation and prayer doesn't mean anything unless it motivates you to be a better person or make the world a better place. So just to simply, she wouldn't put it in these terms, but in a colloquial way, if you're just doing navel gazing,
Hmm.
that's useless. You have these kind of experiences, or you invite these experiences in order to be of service to humanity. That's the kind of line of conversation we were on. What is your motivation to be of service to humanity in multiple ways, in whatever dilettante ways you feel like you want to be engaged? What were some of the first in social activist um, activities you were involved in, if you can remember, where in high school or as a kid or in adult life or whatever, that you remember really becoming engaged with?
I guess it's when. So I think one of the ways I want to answer this question is, I'm not going to say that anything that happened to me spiritually caused me then to want to serve. I don't see that. I just like volunteering. It was a really fun, interesting thing to do. I don't think it was motivated by anything other than just who I was, I guess, my nature or something. So, um, but I do remember when I was a flight attendant, it was during the AIDS crisis. And so there were some people who had started a nonprofit called the Pegasus Project. And it was an effort to help people financially who were struggling with critical illnesses at the time. And so I decided I wanted to be involved. Well, I didn't even know what a nonprofit was. I didn't know. They said, I remember them saying, "So what's your email?" Like, what's an email? Like, I didn't, it was right when we first started having computers and all that kind of stuff. So what I experienced with the Pegasus Project was that the best way to do something is just to do it, and not to let any that you don't know how to do something stop you from doing something. And I think that's always came with me with any of the volunteer work the service work I've done, is that what's really fun is when you really don't know anything about what you're about to do and you just wing it. And I also started doing graduate school at one point, and I was going to do it in nonprofit management. And then I thought, I don't think so. It was kind of boring to study about it. But then we started Grow Local Colorado and things like that. And then it was really fun when you actually do stuff and you learn it by doing it. So that's always been a real joy, is to just jump into things without knowing what the hell you're doing.
Well, you just reminded me. I think one of the other paths that we crossed was with Local Matters. It was basically started by Tom Abood, and
Yeah,
we
Tom.
were kind of a microfinancing
Yeah.
outfit that tried to help start up,
Local food
slow money
Mm-hmm.
kind of organizations
Yeah.
and businesses. Yeah, so we were, Peg and I, my wife and I, were
Mm-hmm.
one of the charter members of that.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, I had met through First Universalist.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that was the other way in which you and I were connected in a not too distant past. But
Mm-hmm.
so, can you just? I don't want you to list these, but some of the more meaningful nonprofits that you feel like you've been engaged in over the years. Some that you stay with, or some that you've kind of.
Well, I'm deep, deep, deep into this immigrant thing right now. So I'm going to say that this has been the most meaningful. For example, what I did today. We'll just talk about what happened today and what's happened in the last few days. That will. So ICE has been showing up at the Denver courthouse and detaining people in the last few days. So there's been a group of people from the American Friends Service Committee, from the immigrant protection teams, and from other lovely volunteers. The Party for Socialism and Liberation have come together, and we are kind of monitoring what's going on at the courthouse. So we have people outside looking to see if ICE are showing up, looking in the back of the building to see if vans are coming and going from the building. We've got people on the different levels on the different floors with the immigration courts, watching to see what happens, making sure that the people who are going there for their check-ins or their meetings are we giving them information. And then today we had a press conference there, and so it'll be on television tonight, that this is what's going on. And this is going on all over the country right now. ICE is picking up people like mad for no apparent reason. It is infuriating and terrifying and so fucking sad. And so the work that I'm doing with the people that I'm doing it now with this kind of thing is the most meaningful thing I've ever been involved with. But I say that every single time I'm involved with something. I always go, this is the most meaningful thing. I was born for this moment. So I guess when you're really involved in something, you feel that way every time. But the whole immigrant thing, and the fact that people are getting kidnapped all over our country right now, is very, very heavy and with me, and very. But I'm so grateful that I'm involved, because there's so many good people who are really going out of their way to try to show up for our immigrant neighbors.
Well, and I'm trying to make an artificial connection here, but the cosmic consciousness title of this podcast for
Yeah.
me means a couple of things. And in a cultural, political, nation state way, I've always wondered why we have nation state boundaries
Yeah.
anyway. And I'm thinking that, those people who want to harden and fortify nation state boundaries may be a little bit retrograde and not understanding the nature in which our global society is moving. And so I was struck, and this is going to be a trite example, but I used to coach tennis, play tennis all the time, and we're watching the French Open. And of course, Rafael Nadal won it 14 times. He's retired, and having this big ceremony for him and opening weekend. And he is talking his little acceptance speech or whatever you want to call it in multiple languages.
Mm-hmm.
He is Spanish by origin, but he's speaking in English, speaking in French. He maybe throws a little German in there. And I'm thinking that is why nation state boundaries are kind of artificial. Mm-hmm. Also, they seem to be artificial because capital from Wall Street or any other stock market doesn't have nation state boundaries. That stuff moves in a New York second, as well does the upper crust. They don't have nation state boundaries. It's only people that are on the bottom 90% that have nation state boundaries and are supposed to stay within those boundaries. So I have this consciousness that I believe nation state boundaries will at some point, it'd be more like what we've got in the United States. The boundaries are there, but they're kind of amorphous. They serve some relative purpose, but everybody understands that you can traverse all of these boundaries without too much trouble, and you don't have to go through checkpoints and all that kind of stuff because we are all citizens of the planet. That seems to be a cosmic perspective, that if you look at this blue jewel, suspended in space, there really aren't any boundaries. So there's
and that the no boundary. If I were to say, okay, let me see how I can say this, because I don't know if the psychedelic stuff had anything to do with this, but I, at this point, intellectually understand that there is no boundaries between anything. You cannot find a boundary between night and day. You cannot find a boundary between the ocean and the beach. There are no boundaries. That means everything is one thing. Mm-hmm. And everything leads to everything else. So everything is a portal to the universe, to the cosmic, to everything. So me looking at you right now, I'm looking into your eyes, and that's the portal into absolutely everything else in the universe, because we can't separate anything. Yeah. So we are inextricably part of everything. And if you know that your immigrant neighbor is you. And so the compassion is automatic because everything is us. Boom. Mic drop. Not all that profound. Wanted to say it.
But it is the most ancient wisdom in human history. It's the cosmic wisdom that we keep coming back to.
Yeah.
That brings us peace and understanding and compassion and all of that. Yeah. So no, that's kind of a great punctuation mark on our whole conversation here.
I think so.
Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about, or something that maybe crossed your mind in our conversation that you didn't get a chance to share?
Um, I don't think so, other than I feel an urge to tell listeners, show up, show up for each other, love on each other, forgive each other, have huge grace for each other, have huge understanding. Even the people we don't understand, love them anyway. People are hurting. We really need to show up for each other.
Lovely. And that is a good punctuation mark. That's a good benediction.
Yeah.
For anybody that needs a benediction. So, well, thank you, Dana. This has been fun, and it may be that we'll need to do this again sometime. We'll revisit some
in
of
another
this.
10 years.
Yeah, we'll cycle through.
I love you, sir. Thank you so much for including me in this.
Thank you. Well, hang in there for a minute, and we're going to sign off, and then we'll chat just a little bit. This has been the Cosmic Consciousness Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Sage. Until next time, peace, everybody.